Good morning. Welcome to my neighborhood. It is a strange, strange world we inhabit today. There are so many things going on, so many factions, so many beliefs, so many birds up in the trees. I was in a meeting the other day, and somebody was, people were talking about climate change stuff, and there were a number of ideas that were floated. One was that here in BC, very often, or at the beginning of a meeting usually, there's a land acknowledgement. We're thankful to be on the unceded territory of whatever Indigenous nation's land you happen to be standing on. And there was a suggestion that perhaps it might be useful to also have an environmental acknowledgement. That, we are living, and it's sort of an extension of this. We're living in an environment that is in trouble right now. Maybe not for everything, but relative to us, it's in trouble right now. We're seeing quite a few reports coming from northern Canada particularly, where they're doing sampling of the tundra. And we know that the north has been having a much greater temperature increase than the rest of the world on a relative basis, plus 5 degrees kind of thing. So we're getting very little sea ice for very little time. And the permafrost, which is defined as staying frozen for beyond a single year, is melting. And it's greening. So it's interesting because permafrost holds potentially a lot of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, and we don't quite know how much. And carbon dioxide, while a major greenhouse gas, methane is much more so. But it's like somebody was saying, it's a vicious cycle, defined as something that, once you start it, impels itself. It keeps going because of the initial kickoff. So as the permafrost melts, it greens, hence it absorbs more heat. It grows and it changes biologically and releases greenhouse gases. But what we don't know is at what level and how deep the majority of the carbon is sequestered. So there are a lot of surveys being done right now, doing mapping with drones. The satellite mapping generally does not provide a fine enough granularity to really understand the nature of the foliage that's developing and where it is developing. Is it in the flats, on the hillsides, in sheltered areas, whatever, and on what kind of substrates it's growing. So lots of data starting to come in. We're also seeing a group which is studying soil I can't remember what the word is, but it's like microbiota in your gut, but it's for soil. That is, it's looking at mycelium and bacteria in the soil. Now, the interesting thing about climate change, or the uninteresting thing, is that the smallest things have a tendency to be most affected. Viruses, parasites, bacteria, and mycelium. And even smaller things than that. we see the effects quite rapidly because bacteria multiply rapidly, and hence they shift what they do based on the environment they find themselves in. And we're seeing some potentially disastrous shifts where instead of absorbing carbon dioxide, they are releasing it, going from 25% absorption to 25% release instead, making the problems worse. And as we are seeing tremendous melt of glaciers in Antarctica and Greenland, we're also seeing strange things like increased uplift, shifting the rotational center, rotational equator of the Earth as the masses are changing. There's less glacial mass, and we're seeing a springback of the continental material underneath it as the massive weighting goes off. This is creating freshwater layer coming out over the North Atlantic, which is changing the jet stream along the east coast, bringing warmer water up from the Gulf of Mexico up into Canada. This is changing the environment for all the sea life, and this is happening in a variety of other places around the world. And of course, small sea life is also subject to change in its behavior relative to its environment. Not just temperature, but amount of salt versus fresh, and pH, and nutrient flows, of course. And the whales we're getting reports of emaciated gray whales all up and down the west coast. We're seeing reports of killer whales. They're not getting enough food. And these are the sort of top and bottoms of the food chain, given how gray whales feed. They're filter feeders. And killer whales eat salmon and some of them other things. So we're seeing massive displacement and shifts happening. So in this meeting, we were told that by some people in regional government that, they tried to declare a climate emergency, but it was voted down, and they figured it wouldn't do much since it's just a one-time thing anyway. And there were enough emergencies. Pandemic, and the pandemic had no link to climate change. And yet we're seeing quite a lot of emergent research which is showing things like temperate zones expanding around the world that are increasing the best areas, the size of those areas for bats to live, and we're getting a flourishing of many species of bats. And of course, some of these have close interfaces with human populations. Bats being a well-known zoonotic reservoir for viral transmission into other mammals. So, climate change, climate emergencies. It's worked quite well, these land statements, to raise the awareness of unceded lands that we're on. I heard a lovely radio program on CBC the other day, and there was a fellow in Montreal that had just bought a condo, and he was wondering how, if he was on unceded lands, he now had a piece of paper that said he owned the land. Who gave that to him? And so the piece was well done because he went backwards from him to all through the historical process that granted him ownership of the land that his condo sat on. And he went back all the way through a ceremony that the King of France had, through a order of Christian brothers that managed the land in Montreal, back through the current chiefs of the local Indigenous peoples who had not ceded the land of Montreal Island. And the bottom line is that there was a difference in the nature of land tenure. The Indigenous form was a responsibility to maintain the integrity of the land and its environment for many future generations. Whereas the land tenure of the Europeans coming in was just a little bit different in its outlook. I'm being slightly facetious there. So it may not be incompatible that when we are talking about the lands on which we stand and how we came to be here, to include a statement about maintaining this land for future generations. That we have a very serious problem right now that has been somehow disassociated from the pandemic we find ourselves in, and everybody's going, okay, we'll go back to what we did before, and every time we do that, we get into more trouble. So maybe it's time to talk about not going back to what we did before, because we have another crisis on our hands, but looking to how we go forward in ways that are not so damaging, that support the rest of the world. So thank you for watching. Click like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye now.